Hi, Megan.
Hello.
How are you?
Good. How is
Good.
everybody here?
We're doing good. So we're
Good.
kind of from all over. So we were discussing the weather because I'm in Texas and it's quite warm, but Cynthia's up in
Uh-huh.
Canada where it's much cooler. Where are you?
I'm in Brooklyn, New York.
Oh, okay. Yep. So Susan's near you on Long Island. So it's cooler
Oh,
up
cool.
there, right?
Yeah, I mean it's not as cold as it was last week, but yeah, it's in the 50s during the days Fahrenheit.
I was up
Yeah.
there the weekend after MLK and it was so cold. It was like in the low teens and with the
Yeah.
wind chill. Oh, it was brutal. I was like, and I don't usually get that cold, but I was freezing. But
Yeah.
now it's like 81 degrees here, so I am no longer freezing. Well, we're glad you're here. Welcome.
Thank you so much. I'm glad to be here.
We've been chatting about your book, but so let's
Uh-huh.
start out. Can you just tell us where you came up with the idea and how you learned about her and you wanted to write about her and then kind of developing it into a book?
Sure. I started out in theater and my theater company, we were thinking about a new project to work on, and I did a lot of the writing, but we kind of developed things as an ensemble. And someone in the company was like, "We want to work on the Wild West." And it's a very general idea, but I'm a researcher and I love doing that. So I was like, "All right, I'm going to just do a deep dive." And so I started looking at a 19th century United States in the West. And I came upon the Pinkertons and was really surprised because what I had known about them was that they, broke up unions and were violent mercenaries and kind of, villains in American history. And at first I read about them working on stopping train robberies, but then I learned about their abolitionist activities and I was blown away. I had no idea. And so that I wanted to know more. And as I studied more, I learned that Alan Pinkerton had also hired the first woman detective in the United States, like 50 years before the police force started using women detectives. I mean, it was really a progressive move on his part. And so again, I was like, okay, what I've understood about these people is not the whole story. And as I looked into Kate Warren, who I thought was fascinating, but there wasn't a whole lot of information about her. I came across some of the other women that the Pinkertons kind of interacted with, and there were a few women detectives in the Pinkertons. Uh, and then I learned about Rose Greenhow, the Confederate spy. And once again, I mean, I'm just going to keep repeating because I'm a big history nerd. I was blown away again. And I was really fascinated by her because she, I despised her politics and her choices. But there were many things about her that I thought were really interesting, that she was an older woman who had had a lot of kids and was a widow and had decided to spy and was seducing people. I mean, maybe not right and left, but more than one person, seducing multiple people for information. Um, and and a lot of people really respected her articulation of her views, even if they despised what they were. It kind of challenged me. I was like, well, how do I feel about people across the political divide from me? Um, how would it, what is the value of tolerance? Would I tolerate this person? And so I was really interested in pitting two people together and seeing what happens when a Union and Confederate women are together. They're both spies, and could they ever form trust? Sorry, that was really long-winded
No, no, that was
explanation
great.
of the background.
And it's so relevant to today. We were talking about that as I was reading it, I just kept thinking over and over again, this is really reminding me a lot of what we're going through now.
Yeah,
Not necessarily exactly what was happening, but being on the opposite sides of a
yeah.
huge conflict and having trouble branching across it.
I
So
feel that every day.
so it was just kind of interesting to see that 150 years ago. But so research, tell me a little bit about trying to find out more about some of these women and the Pinkertons.
Mhm. Well, what's interesting is because I started the project like 10 years ago, I started working on the play and then started writing the novel about uh, at this point, like 4 years ago, the amount of information has changed, which was kind of cool. When I started out, there was virtually no information on Kate Warren except from Pinkerton's accounts. And so he wrote and published books, but they were for a certain audience and they were written, over 100 years ago. And they really kind of I assume sanitized who these women were because my goodness, everything is a compliment about how smart they were, how they were all like very manly, but yet feminine. They're like they had the manly qualities of like intellect and determination and like calmness, but they were still very womanly women. It was very much of the time fitting into those gender binaries and what the expectations were of women. Um, so it was interesting because like it's a historical source, but it's a very biased historical source. And so with Rose Greenhow, I had the advantage of her memoir. So a lot, not all of the text, there was some text I had to invent in the novel, but there are a number of things that come right out of her memoir that she said in the book. And I try to, as much as possible, use her own words. Um, and again, she was writing for an audience too. Um, so everything has to be taken with a grain of salt. And I mentioned this in the afterword, but Pinkerton's version of the events and Rose's versions of the events are different. So that's another thing is you realize, oh yeah, are our sources accurate? I mean, we kind of have to just leap and trust some of them, but this was an example where I kind of had to pick whose story I was going to go with. Um, and so yeah, a lot of books of the time, some internet research, and then I went for Kate's background, which isn't a huge part of the story, but I went and visited the mills, textile mills in Lowell, Massachusetts, and that was just fabulous to get to go and see what it would have been like to be a young woman in that environment. Um, so, and my extended family worked in the mills in Rhode Island, so it was also kind of a family trip.
Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah.
How did you find selling a book about the Civil War? Because I was telling them that I had been, talking to
Mm,
people, and that some people are finding that simpler than others to pitch a story set during this time
mm.
period.
That's a really good question. Um, I don't think I have a good perspective on it because uh, Simon and Schuster, the Atria, they were interested in buying a second book from me. So they were, I think I had an easier time with, I didn't have like a level playing field, so to speak, because they were like invested in buying it. So I don't know. I didn't, it wasn't like an open trying to sell it to multiple places.
Right, where you were going out and pitching it to a variety of
Yeah.
people. I
Yeah,
just
yeah,
think
yeah.
that's interesting because I don't know if it's just because it's kind of a controversial time period right now in terms of
Mm,
people and history and everything that's happening. And so if that's the
yeah.
issue or if it's the particular stories, I'm just kind of fascinated by that as to what um, how they buy what they buy and everything. So that's interesting.
Yeah. I'm interested to see how it does internationally because it seems to be such an American topic. Um, and strangely, like Italy, the Italian rights were sold real fast, and I'm very surprised. It's like I did not know that they had an interest in the American Civil War.
Yeah, that
But
is
so
interesting.
yeah, that interests me too.
Well, does anybody else have questions? I have plenty, but I don't want to make sure if you have questions, you get to ask them. Does anybody have anything they want to? No? Okay, I'll keep
How did
going.
you come up with I'm also a cover person like Cindy is.
Oh,
Can you explain how you got your cover?
oh,
Beautiful
so the
book.
cover right here, this one. So yeah, the Atria, the publishers, they pitched this cover. They kind of asked me, "What are you interested in?" And my ideas are always really off the wall, and no one wants them. They're like, "Oh, huh." okay, well, maybe we're gonna go with something else. But because I liked Alan Pinkerton's books were to me like kind of the graphic novels or like comic books of the time period. And I was like, oh, that'd be so cool if the cover looks like a dime novel. And they were like, well, we're not sure if that's gonna sell. Um, so their fabulous artists came up with this cover. And then I got a little wiggle room in terms of what she was holding in her hands. It's a letter. I was angling for something very active, like maybe a pistol, but we settled on letter, which is very appropriate. So
What
I have
about
a,
the, oh, sorry,
oh,
go
sorry.
ahead.
Oh,
Go right ahead,
sorry.
Susan. No, I've asked a
You,
ton of questions. You go right ahead.
you said that you also wrote a play version of it as well. What was that writing process like? Did you write one and then the other, or were they kind of informing each other as you went?
so the play was in 2013, 2012, 13. So it was a long time ago. And it was also the kind of, so when I'm not writing, I teach at a theater conservatory in Manhattan. And I teach physical theater, which is a very niche subject about, it's kind of like, you've heard of like the Lion King on Broadway with like masks and stuff like that. It's all that kind of weird theater. So that's the kind of stuff I teach and love. So our play was, it was 5 actors on 2 platforms that were 3 feet by 6 feet. We never stepped off. And we created everything in the play without like huge sets with just like really simple costume changes. So in one scene, like a lampshade turns into a woman's bonnet, turns into like turns over and turns into a basin, like it's very like transformative and DIY found object. So again, it's like very downtown New York theater. So it's very, very different. One of my very good friends is a theater critic for the New York Times. She can't see any of my plays because it's conflict of interest, but she came to see it not as a professional like critic, and she was like, it needs more words. And that's how I knew. I was like, I think I need to turn this into a book. Like there needed to be more story, more than just like all the physicality and fun stuff we were doing. And so it took a couple years because I wrote my first book. And then I was like, this I really want to get back to this story.
Laura, are you gonna, I thought maybe Laura was getting ready to ask a question, so I didn't want to interrupt. That's so interesting. I love that it needs more words. Tell me about the title, because, as we're talking about it, you're talking about both women. The
Yeah.
title is really interesting.
Yeah, so I like the fact that it kind of is a little bit of both women, and at the same time, Kate's widowhood is a lie. Um, but I wanted to we wanted to make sure that it was very clear that like women were at the forefront of this story. And then also as someone who is in my late 40s, I like the fact that, widow often suggests in our time period someone who is older. And I like the fact that one of the women is also like has been a mom and has a lot of life experience. And so I liked kind of putting that in the forefront just to kind of, I don't know, let people know that the women are kind of at the head of this story.
Do you think the title could be either woman?
Um, I so that's a really good question. I mean, to me it's Kate, but I do think that Rose Greenhow is like functioning as an antagonist in like the classical way is essential to Kate's kind of arc and development. So I think she really is an important part of this story. But again, I mean, she's the villain, but I think that really does, is so much the kind of the rock that shapes us. It's those hard parts that shape us and how we end up. So
So this
yeah,
was
what did you think? What
Well,
what did you
I
guys
think
think
it's
about the
interesting. Like,
title? Yeah.
obviously, you think it's Kate as you're starting the book, but then as I finished,
Mhm.
I'm like, well, I guess it could really be either woman. That's why I was just kind of curious if it was kind of almost like it had double meaning. Like it's Kate, but then
Mhm.
also really it could be either one of them. Because titles often, when you finish, realize, okay, this title could mean 3 or 4 different things.
Yeah. Yeah, I like the fact that it has that little double entendre going on.
That totally made me lose my train of thought. I had a good question I was gonna ask you, and then I was thinking all about the title, and I'm like, what was I gonna ask? Oh, yes, second book. So
Mm.
what was it like writing your second book after? I mean, did you find that very different than writing your first book? And I haven't read your first book, so I don't know. I remember when it came out, but I don't know how different
Mhm.
it is from this one.
It's very different. So yeah, it was harder. It was actually harder to write the second one. So my first book is called Sin Eater, and it's about a historical. Well, it's alt history, because sin eaters were real people in parts of England, but they were very unusual and really isolated. They were people who would, when someone passed away, for a small amount of money, they would come and eat a piece of bread or a cup of beer on the coffin and ritually take the sins onto their own soul. And I again, I always go down a rabbit hole of history to when I'm writing books, and I was fascinated by that and kind of wanted to explore a sin eater in kind of her journey because they were social pariahs, and so I kind of it's set in Elizabethan England, but in a society where sin eaters are widespread, and kind of basically when Catholicism, one of the reasons sin eaters came into existence is after Catholicism, you didn't have confession anymore. And so it kind of was filling that space in very small Welsh rural communities. Um, and so in my book, when uh, after Henry VIII, when Elizabeth um, comes to the throne, sin eaters become widespread, and it's all women, and they are silenced and treated as social pariahs. And so it's about a young woman's kind of journey into finding people are telling her that she is bad and sinned and spoiled and stained. And then how do you kind of make those decisions for yourself? How do you come to find agency in your life even when everyone is telling you that you have none? So it's also a journey of a woman kind of in it with a very feminist lens on it, just like The Widow's Spy. Um, but yeah, so it was completely different because it was alt history, so I got to play with some things. And it was also like a true murder mystery. So I was also trying to thread the needle of all of that, which is very challenging. But but I think I with the second novel, I think I went in maybe cocky. I was like, I can do this. I can write a novel. And so I got a first draft and I gave it to my agent, and she's like, oh wow, let's write a second draft. You know, she's like, there are too many characters, there's too much going on. I basically packed in like 85 different things, and then I wanted a big twist, and she was like, no, 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 no. Let's slim this down. So now it's a very slim book. I got it down. um, but so yeah, that was a good lesson for me of like, every book is its own thing and you got to take it slow. And yeah.
Well, and I mean, they sound like they're very different. And I think, as you said, each book is different, and you're trying to figure out what you're going to do and what story you're telling and all of that.
Yeah.
That's so funny, though. You're like, oops, okay. What about having her speak to the reader? Like, we were talking about how much we liked that.
Mm. Oh, good, 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 good. Yeah, there's something about, I don't know, in my head, that's just kind of how I felt about her, is like she would just want to, I really liked finding kind of her voice. And I think some of that is also theater, is like I hear the dialogue in my head and I feel like I'm talking to the characters. So I just kind of wanted her to do that. I liked the idea that she would just kind of be a very direct, candid person. And one of the things you spoke to is kind of like the unfortunate relevance of some of the political issues in this. Um, I wanted a chance to kind of, because I was going through it, I wanted to kind of ask people, what would you do? Like if you were faced with this, how would you deal with it? Because I'm not sure. And like I offer a couple different points of view in this. Consider Pritchett has one point of view and Kate has another. Um, Pinkerton has a third. Um, but it was hard because I would find myself changing from day to day of like where I fell and like how I would proceed if I were in that situation.
Yeah, it's so it would be so stressful, you know. I'm always my husband laughs because we'll watch TV shows and anytime there's like a spy, I'm always like, oh, you know, like I can't. I'm stressed for them. I couldn't be a spy
Yeah,
ever in my life. I'm such a wimp. So it has to be stressful writing about them too, and like the situations you're putting them in and what they did. And
definitely. Sometimes it is. I think the adventure feels easier than writing like love scenes. That's harder for me. That's the hardest part, I think.
well, and that raises a great question. You decided to
Mhm.
have a relationship in this. How did you decide to
Yeah.
pursue that and have them fall in love with each other?
It like this is gonna sound so artsy fartsy, but I feel like the characters wanted it. I don't I like I was writing the characters and I was like, this feels like the direction this should go in. Um, I'm mostly like sometimes authors say there's like plotters and panthers, and like yeah, the plotters plan all ahead and the panthers go after the story and find it as it kind of unravels in front of them. I'm mostly a plotter. Um, but in this case, some things happen, and this was a panther moment. I was like, I feel like this is the direction it should go. I want to have this, and I really wanted to have a way for Kate to kind of explore uh her soft heart and kind of find that, because that was the journey she needed to go on. um and of course with Rose there's the mother daughter, that's a huge part of it, but I also wanted her to have another way to explore it, and to have something nice, you know and within this very hard and brutal world of like, where can hope grow even if it seems like it's impossible.
And what do you think happened to them when the book was done?
Mm. It's it's so hard because I know because of history that Kate dies of the flu in 1858. I mean, sorry, eight,
68.
1868. Yes.
I knew what you meant.
Not alive at the yeah, at the beginning now. But so I don't like that. So I like to believe that they were able to move somewhere far away, rural enough where they could live together. Maybe somewhere in upstate New York or something like that, where it obviously wasn't common, but it there is a history, you know. And in fact, in New York City, there was a lot of I just visited the Tenement Museum, and on one of the tours, they talk about the fact they have a lot of the tenement people who live there, and you can see that there were people who were black and white married, living together. Again, not it wasn't a ton of people, it wasn't the majority, but it was possible. And so, in my heart, I carry on hope.
I love that museum.
Yeah.
I think it's really cool. Hi, Renee. I didn't say hi to you as you hopped on. Do you have any questions you want to ask? I'm not putting you on the spot, but I know I've given everyone else a chance. And if you had anything, I saw your review today.
Yeah, I just reviewed it today, finished it last night, and I really enjoyed it because I had not known about this part of history and wondered what made you may have already answered this because I just caught on late, but what made you decide to um, look into this part of history and what intrigued you about Kate?
Mm. So I got into it via the Pinkertons, and I mentioned to the group that like I was amazed to learn about them and how my expectations or what I had known about them turned out to be not the whole story. But Kate in particular, when I read about that she walked into Pinkerton's office and asked for a job, and he was like, "Well, we're not hiring secretaries," and she's like, "No, I'm here to be a detective." And like what a brazen thing to do in the best way, because there had not been women detectives before. And I was thinking about all the jobs that I've had. I have known women have had them before me, you know. So I've never had to take that leap of imagination to be like, oh, could a woman do this? um and she apparently historically gave a great reason, which is that in crimes, like there's women's worlds and men's worlds, and I kind of put it in the book. And like she apparently said to Pinkerton, I can worm out secrets that men have no access to. And in his accounts of his agency's adventures, he often recounts how women are instrumental in doing exactly that. So in particular, you can read his accounts again. They're all from the 1870s and 80s of Kate dressing up as a fortune teller, or getting hurt just outside the suspect's house and having to recuperate in their bedroom, and then all of a sudden a ghost appears in the house and like starts guilt tripping the murderer into confessing. It's like these really amazing. You would think that they were just kind of silly stories that someone made up, but apparently these are actual things that the Pinkertons did and that Kate Warren did, which is, again, I thought this is amazing that this person would take these risks and go do this. I can't imagine. I mean, I work in the theater, but that's all fake. You play a character and then you leave and no one's life is on the line. So I can't imagine doing it with those stakes.
I think it's fascinating. And one of the things you mentioned in the book is how, especially women at that time, kind of were able to fly under the radar and they
Mm,
could do things and just not be noticed as much. And so I think that's a really clever thing and
mm.
really bold of her to do. I love it. And I loved your book. So thank you.
Well, thank you.
Well, and I think that, Megan, what you were saying about not having to be the first woman in a job is an interesting perspective. But the flip side of that too is all of these men having to be used to a woman working. You yourself are coming in and thinking, okay, what do I do in this role? I'm the first female, but also how everybody around you is responding. Like Pinkerton went ahead and took her on, but a lot of men are going to be like, women can't do this job. So you kind of
Yeah.
have, two different things you're dealing with, how you yourself are going to do it. You don't have women role models, but also how you're going to be perceived by everybody else.
Yeah, that makes so much sense. And it was interesting reading Rose Greenhouse memoir, because she mentions uh, that when she was under house arrest, she doesn't talk a lot about the woman Pinkerton who was there, but she uses the most disparaging language and likens her to a prostitute, uh, and is just, really seems to feel like she's contagious. And so it was interesting to see that, it's the men, I'm sure had issues with it, but it's interesting that the
Yeah.
women around her did too.
That's actually a great point. And she was even in your book, you have her, she's so ugly about her, and like vocally, not just doing it behind her
Yeah.
back, but I mean, just flat out saying to her all of these ugly things. It was, I don't
Yeah.
know, but I guess
And
that's,
again, a whole lot of those are
right,
directly from her
which is
memoir.
great.
I
Renee, as I say,
tried,
Renee wasn't on. You
yeah,
need to tell Renee that, because I think that's really
yeah,
interesting. Yeah.
yeah. I tried, like Rose's dialogue. It's not all from her memoir, but I tried to draw as much as possible, and especially when she says particularly hateful things. Um, it's interesting. My mother-in-law is from the South, and her politics are very liberal, very progressive, but she's like, don't sensationalize things. Don't exaggerate if it's not there. And I hope I would not do that. But I did try to be like, no, Rose will, what do you say? Hang herself by her own petard. She's going to do it herself. I don't need to add anything or sensationalize anything. I'm just going to use as much of her own language as possible. And there you go. So yeah, it was also, honestly, it was helpful for me because I didn't have to invent hateful things, which is always a hard perspective to kind of try to get into the head of someone who I personally despise her points of view.
Well, and just to be so hateful, I think that that is probably harder than being like a despicable character or a villain or something, but to somebody who's just literally so hateful, it would be difficult. It's
Yeah.
it's hilarious to me that she went ahead and wrote all that down about herself.
Oh yeah. Well, I mean, she thought
Yeah.
she thought she was the heroine.
So someone told me today that there's a Netflix special about her. Have you heard of that?
Oh, really? No, I can't wait. That's
I'm
always good.
pretty I'm pretty
The
sure
more
someone
people know about her, the
commented.
better.
Was it on your post,
Yeah,
Renee?
I thought someone commented that on my post.
Okay, I'm gonna look really
I'll look
quickly
for it.
while we're talking
Yeah.
because that's interesting. I have heard of her before, but I didn't know she'd written her own autobiography or memoir or whatever, but I'll see here if I can
Yeah.
quickly scan through. Oh, somebody said they really enjoyed your first novel, Megan.
Yeah, Sin Eaters,
Yep.
Yeah.
We talked a
right?
little bit about that, and that sounds so interesting. Now, after you talked about them, I'm trying to zip through the comments. Sorry, everybody. Okay,
Yeah.
here we go. I really enjoyed the Netflix series about her. Oh, that's all it says. I really enjoyed the Netflix series
Okay.
about her. I will have to look up
Huh,
what
well,
it
that's
is.
cool. I'll
Okay.
check it out.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean,
That's
yeah, Rose Greenhow is she's an interesting historical character.
I'm just trying to think of
Just
where else I've come across her because it was in another book, but I don't remember
oh,
whose.
Liar, Temptress, Widow, Spy. There's a book, a historical book that goes over four women who spied during the Civil War
Okay.
that was came out a few years ago.
Okay,
Um,
maybe that is it then.
yeah, it doesn't go into quite as like because it's four women, it doesn't go into a whole lot of detail, but it's not bad.
Yeah. Oh, well, and I will tell you that I just recently read Stephanie Dre's book about Frances Perkins, who was the first
Oh,
Secretary of Cabinet member in the US, first female cabinet member. She was Secretary of Labor under FDR. And
oh, cool.
it made me think so much about your book as I was reading, because another woman, paving the way for the rest of us. First
Mm.
person, first woman to be a cabinet secretary, what that was like. She had to create the roles, she had to stand up for herself. And it just really I love all these stories that are coming about these women,
Mm.
because, if you'd listened to history 30 years ago, women had never done anything until recently, and it's neat. There actually
Right.
were all these women. It's just their
We were
stories
just all
haven't.
at home, you
Yeah,
know?
exactly. We were all sitting
That's all
around.
people were doing.
Right, exactly. So I just love it because I just feel like book after book is coming out about different women who were actually helping us out, paving the way for the rest of us.
Yeah, and if you look at again back to the textile mills, it was so many young women were working those mills, and all of a sudden having their own income, and that totally changed their role in society. And actually, there's a book called The Factory Girls, because that's what they were called, the mill girls. Even if they were like 60 years old, they were called a girl. Um, but I actually read another book looking at China and the factories there and the women, and it's called Factory Girls, and it's kind of like a parallel book, but it's focused on like the 90s and 2000s and how women's roles in society are changing when they have an income. And it's really interesting how much it changed the structure of families and kind of women's position in a family when they were making money suddenly and not just a mouth to feed and then marry off.
That is interesting. And in addition to the income, which is the most important part, also just getting out of the house. So you're surrounding yourself with other people that are similar, and you're able to have more of a social life. You're not just sitting at home with your kids. Not that sitting at home with your kids is very important, but when you're getting out of the house more. At the time, people, didn't have play groups and all the things everybody does now. So they really were exposing themselves to other adults, which I think probably
So
helped a lot
true.
too.
Yeah.
Well, does anybody else have any questions before we wrap up? No? Okay. Well, Megan, thank you so very much
Yeah.
for chatting with
My
us.
pleasure.
We really
Yeah.
appreciate
Thank you
it. And
guys so much
everybody
for
have a great
reading.
night. All right.
Awesome.
Bye.
Bye-bye.